All right, what's up? Hope everybody had a great bye week. Welcome back in. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, GC Live, presented as always by Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Y'all know the drill. Clint's been with us for a long time, so unless you're a new listener, you already know it. If you're in the market for a new home, hit up Clint. It is as simple as that. If you are Maybe you're renting, maybe you've been thinking about going into the home ownership route and you're just not sure, hey, what does it cost? What are interest rates? What can I afford? Just hit up Clint, tell him all those things. He's going to walk you right through the process and make it very, very simple for you, just like you did for me and my wife when we bought the house that I'm sitting in right now. 803-422-6797. That's the cell phone number. You can call him, you can text him, however you prefer. Hit him up. And again, more information, ClintHammond.com. Chris, we are in the 5-game. I don't know if you can call it a sprint yet. Maybe a 5-game grind. Maybe, a 5-game stretch. No more bye weeks. No more, not that there's do-overs, but no more breaks. No more ifs, ands, or buts. We're going to find out exactly the way South Carolina fans and everybody else remembers this 2024 season based on, in my opinion, what happens the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, man, we were talking about it earlier today. You know, Shane Beamer now in his 4th November as South Carolina's head coach. And in the previous 3, there have been some ups, there have been some downs in November. There have definitely been some thrills, and it's always been interesting. And so 8-4 as the Gamecocks head coach in the month of November. Of course, we've seen some of the best moments, right, in his tenure in the month of November. The win over Tennessee, the road win over Clemson. Last year's Kentucky game, right, was a fun one. And so always interesting. And this is one where there's going to be a lot of challenges. And it starts this weekend with a now top 10 Texas A&M team coming in. West, this Gamecocks team, of course, is still trying to achieve bowl eligibility, but have goals beyond that, right? I mean, you've got 3 losses, but a lot is still in front of you in terms of what you want to accomplish. Not mention, you've got a rivalry game in the regular season finale. You've got some games that are probably more compelling even than you thought they would be coming into the 2024 season. So a great opportunity. We only get 5 more of them, as you said, before the season's over, 5 of them guaranteed. So let's try to enjoy them and see what happens.
Yeah, this A&M game, man, honestly, in terms of matchups and how we view it from a South Carolina sort of lens, I don't know if many of them have shifted more than this one. Not maybe Missouri to an extent, but they've kind of gone different directions. Vandy has obviously shifted just in terms of, hey, Vandy can beat you. They're pretty good, but I feel like in terms of like, all right, A&M, hey, they're coming here, start the year, new coaching staff. Let's see what they got at quarterback. I mean, I certainly didn't have them being undefeated in SEC play after watching them lose at home to Notre Dame to start the year. And then, we've talked about the roller coaster of, all right, how do we feel about Carolina after Old Dominion? Then how did we feel about Carolina after Kentucky? Then Ole Miss. Then Alabama and Oklahoma. So, it's been this wave in terms of that. Now, as we sit here less than a week into the matchup, it's kind of, I don't know, like if you start looking at the FPI stuff, the analytics, the Vegas lines, even though the records are very different in terms of standings and SEC play, you look at this game and even outsiders are going, hey, this is close to a toss-up. Like there is that little lean towards A&M, but in no way, even with A&M being a top 10 team, could you present it as an upset if South Carolina wins? Yeah, you could. Would it be a small Vegas line upset if Carolina wins? Yeah, it would be. But this is not a game that you're going into. Even I'm talking about outsiders, like people who have no dog in this fight. Nobody's going to be shocked if Carolina wins this game. And Ben chiming in here on YouTube, I actually think this is a sneaky good matchup for us. I think I agree with you, Ben, particularly Carolina's defense. against A&M's offense. Now, on the reverse, I think A&M's got some dudes that can give you some trouble up front. But I also think this South Carolina defense has got some dudes at all three levels that are going to give A&M some trouble as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt, man. And, I think on the surface, like you can look at some of the point totals that A&M has put up this year, right? And, let's take out McNeese, let's take out Bowling Green. No offense to the Falcons or the Cowboys. But they put up 33 points against Florida, 21 against Arkansas. But you look at their last 3 games, Wes, they've scored 41 in a blowout against Missouri, 34 against Mississippi State, 38 against LSU. So you look at their offense and you go, they're putting up some points, right? At the same time, and John Brice, our guy from Football Scoop, mentioned this today, they're not super dynamic offensively. I know Marcel Reed came in and did a great job, but when you think of A&M in this team, they have a defensive-minded head coach in Mike Elko. You think about their defense even more than their offense. And in fact, Wes, look at that LSU game. You pointed this out. Their offense was put in some great positions because of the play of their defense, turning Garrett Nussmeier and LSU over 3 times, specifically in the second half, getting great field position. The point I'm trying to make is, if you go back and look at South Carolina's games this year, who they've won against, who they've lost against, it is interesting that they had the road win against Oklahoma, right? A road blowout of Oklahoma, a road blowout of Kentucky. Those are 2 teams that were kind of viewed as defensive teams, stronger defense, questionable offense. Teams that South Carolina's lost to, LSU, Ole Miss, Bama, have been considered more offensive teams. Now, does that mean anything for Saturday once they line it up? I don't really know, but I do think it's interesting that South Carolina has had more success this year against the teams that have been viewed as really strong defense, a little bit more questionable on offense. South Carolina has not only won those games, they've won them handily, and they've held both those teams, Kentucky and Oklahoma, to single-digit point totals. So it is on the other side, on the flip side, going to be a big challenge for this Gamecock offense because they've got a lot of work to do to get better, and you're going to be playing an A&M defense that, to steal your quote, absolutely has some dudes and are very well coached and play very hard.
Yeah, it seems like every year you play them, man, they can have, this group has lost some guys to the portal. You go back a few years ago, and really one of the talks of the college football world was all the innuendo about NIL and A&M and, the best defense money can buy and all this stuff and 5-star after 5-star. And, they lose some of those guys to the portal. You can go back, you can look at some of the guys that Carolina has played against, really even since A&M became the permanent opponent. I mean, there's like a who's who of just stud defenders up front. And many of them, have gone on to the NFL, of course. But it's like every year, you don't even have to look at the names. It's just like, oh, well, there's another. That's what an SEC defensive line is supposed to look like, is what I always think about with A&M. And, you come into this one, though, obviously Carolina, they've got a pretty daggum good bunch up front as well on the defensive line. And I look at both sides and I think both offensive lines are going to have their hands full this week. And that's kind of been the case in a lot of games South Carolina's gone into. It's the case once again in this one. And I'm really, really curious to see, I think, first of all, what does A&M decide to come out and do at quarterback? I think most of us are assuming it's Marcel Reed. I kind of felt like Beamer was all of us today when he was like, Marcel Reed has played in a lot of games this year. Like this was not, it's not a secret weapon they've been holding and hiding in the injury tent for over half the year and just sprung him on LSU in the second half, which is part of the reason it's so just mind numbing to me that LSU did not look prepared at all to face Marcel Reed. But, I think impressive performance from him, took advantage of the opportunity. You're going to see a Gamecock defense much more well prepared, honestly, for both quarterbacks. Like
Yeah.
This is not something new. This is a veteran South Carolina defense. They'll be prepared for both guys. In theory, Chris, and I don't even want to say in theory, I think in reality, I think this is borderline of fact. We'll see what Marcel Reed's career ends up being. But you made this point earlier. You faced a quarterback with a better resume in Jalen Milroe with Alabama, and you have faced quarterbacks with better passing resumes than Connor Wegman as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes, they're on the same team. It's the same week. You could see both. Like, you easily could see both, but I don't think that's some – I think you're much more concerned about can you block them up front when you're on offense and not turn the ball over when you're on offense than you should be about the A&M quarterback situation.
Yeah, and Wes, maybe he'll have a phenomenal game, and we're sitting here next Monday eating our words. But
And we will eat the crow on Monday.
Absolutely,
if that's
you know, and in saying this, not trying to like diminish what he's done or his game, right? What the point I'm trying to make is, you know, oh man, did you see what Marcel Reed did against LSU? It's like, yeah, but I've seen what Jalen Milroe's done to SEC teams for more than one game, right? I've seen, you know, what Garrett Nussmeier did against South Carolina and other teams. I know he didn't have a great game in the past. Like, you're battle tested if you're South Carolina. You've played mobile quarterbacks. You've played different offensive styles. You're not getting a surprise in, oh, Marcel Reed's coming out and he might run the zone read. You know, you've seen it, right? Whether or not you can contain it, I mean, that is the question. And I do like your point. It's something that I think we've talked about some, but really needs to be hammered home. You had a great story, by the way, if an analysis, whatever you want to call it, Wes, about the Gamecock defense and the blueprint of how they built the team. Go check that out on Gamecock Central. But like one of the things is they have a ton of experience. This is a veteran team. You're not going to throw a bunch of stuff at these guys that collectively they haven't seen before, right? And they're also talented and they're fast, you know? And so, yeah, go check it out. $1 for 2 months. Code SCAR1, SCAR1. We didn't make the code. Don't get mad at us because it says SCAR. You should be happy about it because it will give you $1 for 2 months. You can go check out Wes's blueprint on how the Gamecock defense was built for 2024. Really good stuff. And everything else that we've got up. Go check that out. But yeah, Wes, I mean, they've seen a guy like Marcel Reed before, right? And, you know, do you see one quarterback? Do you see two? They've seen this style before. I don't know that Marcel Reed in the last game was particularly challenged, right? Got put in some really favorable positions by the Texas A&M defense. Only had to throw the ball 2 times. You know, if you're Carolina, you're hoping to contain the run game and make this guy a third and 8 passer. Go beat us, you know, and if he does, you tip your cap. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, look no further, Chris, than the sort of reaction from him right at the end of the game. He basically said, look, they weren't on the zone read. They weren't taking me. Like, they were not accounting for me. So I kept running. I don't know if y'all heard the tone or saw that interview, but his body language was almost the same as mine at home, where I was just going, what is going on here? Like, this is not some crazy offense that no one's ever seen before. And I don't know, maybe there was something different in the schematics that was just a little different. You know, coaches make tweaks that are very hard to notice at home, but I don't know, man. Also, speaking of body language, did not love the body language of Connor Wegman when he was told he was being pulled from the game. And, you know, I'm not a lip reader, not a body language expert. Sometimes that stuff gets overblown, but I think when your quarterback, your potential leader, your guy kind of has some bad body language, that to me matters. And just maybe something to remember, something to keep an eye on moving forward, depending on how this thing plays out for A&M at that position, as they, frankly, at this point, Chris, try to make a run at the first ever SEC championship for that school, and obviously, even bigger picture, at the playoffs. So somebody mentioned on here earlier, Williams-Brice Stadium, where playoff chances go to die. And we have seen this place create a bit of, like, you knew the atmosphere was special if you're a Carolina fan. But we've seen Williams-Brice Stadium late season, at night, home atmosphere start to get its due from a national standpoint, I think. So for me, it's kind of like the can you give fate a chance thing that Spurrier used to say. To me, the common thing in a lot of these games where Carolina was able to pull some upsets along the way has been how these games have started. Like, you've been able to keep the fan base locked in and then ride that wave of momentum. I want to say that Auburn game, Beamer's first year, Carolina got behind in that one.
Yep.
But a lot of these games, you look at Florida that year, you, of course, you look at Tennessee, Carolina goes right down the field and scores in that game. You look at A&M a couple years ago, Luedecke, how could we forget, takes the opening kickoff back. Place is going absolutely insane. You got the fair in the background. Just a spectacle. And so there is a national level respect for opponents having to go to Williams-Brice Stadium and find a way to win. A lot of times, man, to me, it kind of the key is, can you find a way to just keep everybody in the thing to start with, as opposed to, not that it was a night game, but the Ole Miss game.
Yep.
You could just feel the atmosphere tip, like kind of go in the wrong direction a little bit when Ole Miss took their fairly big early lead.
Yeah, you're right. You can pick out some examples of, hey, that Auburn game, Carolina got down, the Clemson game on the road in 2022, right? But really, with home games, that's when you have a better opportunity to get something done early and have it just snowball from there. There was, Wes, did you see, by the way, on the Twitter machine, that there was somebody, some writer, and I can't say if she works in sports or not, but she claimed that momentum was not real in sports, not a real thing. I don't know if you saw that.
I've not seen that. I don't want to put this on him if I'm wrong. I want to say, was that always a take by Gary Danielson as well? There was an announcer that would always say over the years, like, basically, it's not about momentum, it's about execution type thing.
Oh, yeah. I don't know who, but somebody claimed that, and, there were some that agreed, but most did not, and I was among those. I do not agree. We could do an entire podcast on it probably, so I won't go there, but, you would much rather play from ahead, and I think this team, Wes, is certainly much more, this South Carolina team, built to play from ahead. When you look at how the roster is constructed, the fact that when you're playing your best ball, you're playing great defense, you're taking care of the ball, you're moving the chain some, running it some, hitting a big play here and there. You're not, this South Carolina team is not going to turn into a team that hums up and down the field on offense, I don't think. If they do, I'll come back and eat some crow on that too. I just think the way that they are constructed, it's best to be able to play from ahead. So you can't have what you had in the Ole Miss game where you get early, the equivalent of a fake punt decision. I don't think we'll see that again, right? But something that's the equivalent of that kind of takes the wind out of the sails early, right? This is going to be a huge atmosphere. It's going to be awesome night game. Everybody's going to be keyed up. And frankly, there's a lot of pressure on Texas A&M, Wes, if you really start thinking about it. And I'm sure Mike Elko, I think he's done a really good job in his first year as a head coach. I actually think very highly of him as a coach, schematically. But this will be a test, right? A&M's in prime position right now, undefeated in the SEC. And they have a schedule that was a lot more favorable for them to make a run this year, if they could make one. Well, they have. but they have at South Carolina this weekend. They have an off week. They play a non-con game. Then they play at Auburn, who's not very good this year. And then they play Texas at home, right? So they have an opportunity to go undefeated or lose one conference game, and they're in the SEC title game, and they're looking at the playoff. Or they could lose 2 conference games here at the end. And so I think there's actually a good bit of pressure on them. Can South Carolina apply that pressure early and make them play from behind and get this crowd really keyed up? I do think that'll be a factor, and that's another reason why I think momentum's real, because if you could create some early plays, that keeps the fans engaged, and having a loud, engaged fan base always helps you in the game of college football.
Excuse my ignorance on this one. Do you know if Texas A&M is that back to being a Thursday thing, or is it a normal Saturday? Do you know off the top of your head?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can effort it in about 2 seconds because I had it up. It is Saturday, November 30th, according to this schedule website.
Man, hey, think about the stakes in that one. Depending on how things play out.
Yeah. It's already going to be awesome. I'm very glad that game's coming back. I mean, to not have it for a while stunk. So that'll be a great game to have back regardless. But you're right. I mean, Texas, you look at Texas over the next few weeks. They've got Florida at Arkansas and Kentucky. And so they could be sitting there at 6-1, right? Going into that last game. A&M could be anywhere from, undefeated in conference to, having a couple conference losses, but the stakes could definitely be high for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that could be SEC championship appearance on the line. That could be, depending, if they lose a few games in between now and then combined, that could be playoff is on the line or not on the line. I mean, that one's going to be fun. And so, Chris, momentum. I think that's an analytics thing too. People, momentum's not real. It's all about the math, and I can't buy that. It doesn't have to be upper level SEC football. Go play a game on the beach with your family, and momentum becomes a thing. I think like momentum. You almost can't explain it, but you can feel it, in my opinion. Who's played a basketball game where the other team just starts to get hot and you just sort of see your teammates start to slump their shoulders a little bit because of the effects of what the other team is doing on you at that moment, and then it snowballs on itself. So I've never bought into the idea. To me, that's not everything to do with home field advantage, but momentum certainly is a big role in home field advantage. But anyway, let's get back to the game itself, Chris. Injuries. We did get a little bit of an update today from Shane Beamer. Was not sure if he would give us a straight up update or if it would be more, hey, wait until Wednesday. We'll have a SEC availability report Wednesday night. That will still be the case around 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. But he essentially said, hey, Jared Brown will be back. That was kind of expected, but it was an even, I would say, stronger step compared to we expect him to be back. He essentially said, Jared Brown will play this week. Not as good of a news with DeAndre Jules, of course, South Carolina's reserve, but still impact defensive lineman who it appears will also miss this week, has been out since Ole Miss. But for the most part, man, a relatively healthy South Carolina football team coming out of this bye week. And I'm curious, Chris, what do you think the advantages are this bye week that Lenora Sellers and Rocket Sanders, for that matter, but really with your young quarterback is what I'm getting at, was able to actually go practice and be full go and not really that first bye week. A lot of that was built around, hey, let's get 16 healthy. I would think this bye week was built around, hey, let's do everything we can to get 16 and this offense as a whole ready to make a run in these final 5 regular season games.
Well, and I think that's kind of lost in the discussion. There's been so much talk about how South Carolina did not play well at all after the last bye week, right? And so Shane Beamer's fielded questions on what are you going to do differently to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And look, he hasn't run from it. He said, I mean, his quote was, "We played like hot garbage," quote unquote, last time that they lined it up against Ole Miss after the bye week. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen every time, but as a coach, you do have to look at that. And I think that's something that is getting lost a little bit in that, yeah, you're right. You were just trying to get Rocket and Lenore Sellers to Saturday to be able to play. Probably didn't matter as much with Rocket because he's played a lot of college football. But with the guy who, aside from the center, is the only player who literally touches the ball on every play on offense and is a redshirt freshman who each week is, seeing some new things and starting his, whatever this is going to be, not even a full slate of games, it 100% matters. It's a lot different to have a guy, who's another week or two experienced, who is healthy and, has just bumps and bruises at this point from playing a college football season and is going through a whole week of practice versus a guy that is a few weeks younger, is banged up, and is not really getting to practice fully and facing a really good defense. So I think it matters a bunch. Now, does that mean the result's going to be, what you want out of Sellers individually or as a team with a win on the scoreboard? I don't know yet, but it definitely matters. And I think it's definitely going to help that you have a 16 who can go through a full week of practice.
No doubt, man. Obviously going to be a great atmosphere on Saturday, and maybe somebody out there looking to join that atmosphere. If you don't have tickets yet, hit up our friends over at Game Time by going to gametime.co or download the Game Time app. As you can see it right there, kind of blurry, but there it is. You can see it as it says. Homecoming as well for South Carolina. And if you get the Game Time app, lots of great features on here, guys. For one, it's going to make it very, very easy for you to sort through all the deals. At the very, very top little slide here, you're going to see some deals that have been curated for you. And, I think for South Carolina, you look at this game, you can click the GT picks, you can click all in pricing. And obviously it's a kind of tough ticket, not going to lie to you. So you're going to have to pay for it. But still, you can find the best deals if you're a South Carolina fan or an Aggie fan by hitting the little super deals button. All in pricing will also let you know exactly what the final price is going to be for that ticket right off the bat, right there on the surface, as opposed to getting to the very end and finding out what it may cost you then. So again, hit up our friends at Game Time, and for a limited time only, terms do apply on this, but for limited time only, use code OWN3 at checkout and get $20 off your purchase. Again, shout out to our friends at Game Time for being a sponsor here on our show and several other shows on the OWN3 network. Chris, what changes do you want to see on offense? Beamer was asked about the scheme changes, and he was basically like, "I'm not going to tell you that," as you would expect.
Here's what we're going to do, guys.
Let me draw it up for you. Let's pull out the tape. We'll tell you what our script is going to be. But no, is there anything that stands out to you that you would want to see or you think can help Carolina on Saturday?
Well, let's start with, so let's work the problem backwards. So I would go back to the few things that I mentioned. I don't know, probably been talking about them a while, honestly, Wes. And they are a lot of them, some of them related to Sellers specifically, like earlier in the season as he continued to grow. But really, a lot of them are just offense in general, right? So when you look at the offense, what are the problems? Well, for many weeks, turnovers were a big problem. They were not against Oklahoma, which was great. And so that's obviously one thing you have to hope continues. And you try to coach to that and you try to scheme to that and et cetera. So turnovers, negative plays, right? There's been way too many negative plays for this offense. You can think about that in terms of sacks. You can think about that in terms of just runs, that have not gone anywhere or have been negative plays. And then the other thing is just protection. So a lot of that relates to the sacks. When you look at Sellers specifically, I think one area that he's needed to continue to grow, which I think he has at times as he's progressed, is just seeing the field more consistently in the passing game. That comes with time. I think that will continue to get better. So for the offense as a whole, turnovers, protection, eliminate the negative plays. So to try to fix that problem, what do you do? Right. And I think you got to look at what you're doing in protection. What kind of passes are you calling? What are your protection schemes? Do you need to keep more people in? Do you need to make sure the ball is coming out faster? I don't know the answers to these. Fortunately, I'm not employed to be the offensive coordinator. It'd be a very high pressure job. We'd have even more people yelling at us than we do in our jobs, Wes. Whew, that'd be rough.
Hey, you make pretty daggum good money to do it, though.
Make a lot of money to take the yelling. This is true. Yeah. So it'd probably be okay. But I think, and then looking at the run game, one thing that Beamer mentioned, and this doesn't give away what they're going to do, but, he made an obvious, but I think good point in that during the bye week, you're getting some extra time to go back and catalog everything and look everything. What do we need less of? What do we need more of? And so I think it's doubling down on what's worked well for you and then having some counters off of that and some additions and then subtracting the things that haven't worked. If you're looking at it and you're going, and this is just an example, we've run outside zone 21 times this season. We're averaging -2 yards every time we run it. You're probably going to think about scrapping that, right? And I haven't cataloged all the plays, admittedly, so I don't know. And I don't know the schematic answers, but those I think are the biggest areas. But Wes, when this offense, even though it's not extremely, extremely dynamic, when they haven't turned the ball over, they're pretty good because that means your defense and your offense and your special teams are playing complementary football and you get a result like we saw at Kentucky or at Oklahoma. And that, I think, is kind of your blueprint for what you need to do.
Yeah, and Chris, I think when you come out of a bye week, to me, can you still a play from a team? Can you still, and I don't mean like, hey, I saw this team do this, we're going to try to do it. I mean, like, is there something you can throw at A&M that they just have not seen on tape? Can you steal a possession? Can you, we've seen South Carolina in some very specific situations dial up the exact right call against the right defense and score a touchdown off of it. Can you steal a touchdown or a drive or something by giving them a look that they haven't seen this year that maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable putting something like that in with some extra time than you do basically week to week where it's just a sprint every week, man. You're just trying to get as much done as you can before game day hits, and you have incredibly limited time to do it with the NCAA's limits on how much practice time you have. So I think it's kind of fascinating to see the little wrinkles teams put in after a bye. Can you find a little advantage here or there? And these days with the iPads, like, they're going to adjust to you more than likely. Like if there's some new run that you say, hey, we're going to put this in and we're going to run it till they stop it. By a couple of drives, more than likely they will have made the adjustments on you. And I don't even know if it goes to halftime anymore like it used to. It's, hey, let's put this in on the sideline while our offense is on the field, and boom, they're adjusted to you. But can you find a little advantage here or there, whereas A&M was focused on LSU this past week, and you were focused on getting healthy and self-scouting and figuring out exactly where you are as an overall team? One of the comments on here mentioned that some of the A&M media guys were basically saying it's going to be one of the worst offensive lines we're going to face. Well, I mean, statistically, Carolina has given up a ton of sacks this year. So I don't look at that as some huge disgraceful thing for them to say. Like, if you look at the stats, you're probably going to look at it and say Carolina's offensive line, or Carolina's offense, if you want to be completely accurate, Carolina's offense whether it's the O-line, the quarterback, the tight ends, the play call, and the wide receivers. Add all that up, quarterback has gotten hit too many times this year. And so how can you find a way to maybe lessen that going into this week? I know people say quick game, roll the pocket, screens, but that only gets you so far because ultimately you have to be able to throw the football down the field. And in order to throw the football down the field, you have to be able to find some ways to protect it.
Yeah, you do. I'm glad you made that point. You and I were talking about that this week. You know, it's kind of similar to when people say, hey, if the defense is going to stack the box, right? Well, if they are bringing that many, you can take away RPOs. You can take away, short routes. You can, roll in the pocket. You're literally limiting yourself to about half the field, right? So you're limiting your route options. You can do those things on occasion. And if you're doing a good job, you're going to mix in things like that. But at some point, you do have to stand back there and be able to make plays. And even, like you can think of plays this season, Wes, where even in the midst of South Carolina having protection issues all year, you can pick out some plays, some big plays that South Carolina's had where they've called a play that called for the quarterback to be protected for more than 2 seconds, where they've hit a big play. I mean, think about the 4th and 9 pass to Mazio Bennett against Alabama. That was a play where you're dropping back. It's not a quick hitch. Like, that's a play that required some protection, some development, and they've gone the other way too. So at some point, you got to be able to line up and have some trust in your guys to be able to execute some blocks. On the other hand, the bye week probably, if I had to guess, gave South Carolina staff some clarification and some evidence that, yeah, there have been pass protection issues this season, not only from the offensive line, but I can think of some plays in my head, the tight ends, the backs, the quarterback not getting the ball out fast enough. It's all of those things. So what can you do for all those things to work together better where, look, A&M, I think they're going to have some sacks on Saturday night. What can you do to minimize those plays, to minimize the amount of negative plays that you have?
Yeah, and this is a great point by William. A&M does have a lot of blitz packages, and Elko, the more you sort of, and I watched what he did at Duke to like at a very casual standpoint. Like I wasn't watching a ton of Duke's games. It was more like, all right, if you're doing that at Duke, you're doing something right. Like, this is impressive. Maybe watch a couple of their games along the way. But what sort of stood out to me, both watching them in the second half against LSU and what I've read about Elko, is that this guy does do a fantastic job of designing pressures. And, this is an aggressive A&M defense. They even, I believe he said going into the half or coming out of the half, we've not been aggressive enough. And they turned up the heat in the second half. And obviously it was masterful. Like it worked. They were getting pressure in the backfield. They're creating turnovers. And we'll get into the scheme a little bit after we dive into it throughout the week. And we'll have our final preview show on Thursday, live from BP Skinner in the Vista. But I want to go into this scheme a little bit then, man, because it's not the same scheme as what Venables runs at Oklahoma, but there is some similarity, some crossover in terms of the mindset of, hey, I'm willing to bring extra guys. I'm willing to run a lot of different looks. I'm not just going to drop back, rush for, play coverage, and just say, hey, my 4 guys are going to get there. They're very much willing to mix things up. I think it's a lot from what I've read, or at least some of what you call like pattern matching on the back end, which is kind of zone that turns into man. Just watching on TV, it looked like they were playing a lot of, or some just true man against LSU, which I think tells you how much confidence they have in their DBs, because as we saw, that's a pretty good LSU wide receiver core. Like they have some good receivers. They have a good tight end that can go get the football. And so for A&M to be willing to play, whether it was pattern matching or just straight up man, bring extra pressure up front, I promise you, if they think they can do that against LSU, they're going to feel like they can do that against South Carolina, which has a receiving core that I believe has improved as the year has gone on, but certainly does not garner the same amount of respect, just frankly, as what LSU gets from like a national and SEC standpoint. So that's going to be a fascinating game within the game. What can Loggins draw up? What does Elko draw up? And how do all those things sort of line up? Chris, as we close out today's show and close out our thoughts, particularly on Beamer and the press conference today, anything else that caught your attention that we need to hit?
Well, I know we touched on it, Wes, but Jared Brown being back, how much of a factor will he play? I think that's a question that I have. It's not the equivalent of, say, to use a recent example, if Xavier Luedecke had missed a game and then returned, right? It's not the same. I'll admit that. But is Jared Brown a guy that can make an explosive play through the air for you? Is he a guy that you can hand the ball to on a jet sweep and he can move the chains for you? Yes. And so in a game where I think, probably points are at a premium, Wes, and, it's probably a few big plays here and there, that might be important. So that's something that really stood out to me. You'd love to have DeAndre Jules back just to give your other defensive tackles a bit of a breather. He's a guy that can come in and not just, like you said, not just play some snaps, but play some impactful snaps. You'd love to have him back. Hopefully you can get him back at some point, but you won't have him. But that's really the only other thing that stood out really to me. I have some other thoughts that I think will be probably better suited for later in the week as we dive into scheme and all those things.
Yeah, and also at receiver, man, I thought there were some flashes from Dre Jacobs against Oklahoma, and we saw him get Offensive Player of the Week from the staff for his performance in that game. Typically, that means you've probably had a pretty good week of practice, in my experience. Like, I don't think they give it to the guy if he just had a good game. Like, I think that typically means you're doing the right thing. So, can he continue to emerge? SC Scout guy says, hope Gage Larvadain gets more touches. So, we're kind of, I feel like, Chris, we've whittled that group down at receiver from preseason. Remember, we were like, hey, there's 9 guys, and who knows who the top 6 will be? Who knows who the top 3 will be? I think they've whittled it down to maybe 5 or 6 guys, but it is still sort of a work in progress on who the top 3 are going to be for this final 5-game stretch. We know Mazio is in that mix, but as far as the other guys, still kind of up in the air. And hey, even as much as we have tried to slow people's roll on Nick Harbor and say, hey, let's be fair here. It's going to take time. It's going to take time. I think there have been some positive signs on Harbor as well that he has been coming along. So I think that will obviously be a key as we move forward. What does this receiving core look like as this thing ends? And if you're playing teams that are going to be willing to press you and play man coverage and dare you to get open, that's a little different than playing these zone teams where I think zone teams, you scheme up wins against zone teams. Against man teams, your guys have got to find a way to separate. There's some things you can do, slants, shallow crossers, mesh concepts, what defensive guys would call a pick, what offensive guys would call a rub. Hey, how about that for a tiny key to victory, Chris? Can you run some of these man beater routes without getting called for offensive pass interference?
Game within the game. Yes.
I mean,
yeah, really.
Huge game within the game. So, all right, y'all, that's going to do it for today. Appreciate you for hopping on. Appreciate our sponsors for supporting us. And as always, we'll be back on Thursday for our final South Carolina versus Texas A&M preview on homecoming weekend in Columbia, South Carolina. For Chris, I'm Wes. Y'all have a good one.